The smell hit the cafeteria like a wave. David Torres didn't notice at first. He was too busy arranging his dinner on the table, pulling containers from his thermal bag one by one. The chicken had stayed warm, the skin still crispy from the oven in his quarters. Steam rose from the rice when he opened that container, carrying the scent of butter and herbs into the recycled air of Meridian's rest station around him. Conversation stopped. David looked up, fork halfway to his mouth, and found himself surrounded by empty tables. The cafeteria had been half full just moments ago. Now aliens of every description were backing toward the exits, some covering their breathing holes, others moving with the careful speed of people trying not to cause a panic. HFY server approached his table, all 6 legs moving in nervous synchronization. Her name tag read Rena. She kept her distance, mandibles clicking softly. "Excuse me," she said, her translator rendering the words in flat standard. "What are those volatile compounds?" David blinked. "It's dinner. Roasted chicken with garlic and herbs. Some rice, vegetables." He gestured at his food, confused by the question. Reina's antennae flattened against her head. "Garlic, that is a sulfur-based toxin, yes? And the protein source, it has been exposed to sustained high temperature?" "I cooked it, if that's what you mean." "Cooked." Reina repeated the word like she was testing it for danger. "We have received complaints about human food preparation. The database lists most human cuisine as potentially hazardous to station life forms." David set his fork down. He'd been on Meridian's rest for 3 months, working as a trade negotiator for the human delegation. In all that time, he'd eaten mostly in his quarters or with other humans. The few times he'd tried the station's communal dining hall, he'd brought pre-packaged meals from Earth. This was the first time he'd brought something he'd actually cooked himself. "I didn't know," he said. "I can eat somewhere else if it's a problem." Reina's translator made a sound that might have been sympathy. "You are not violating regulations. But perhaps it would be more comfortable for other species if you chose a different location for meals involving thermal preparation methods." She left before David could respond. The cafeteria was nearly empty now. A few beings remained at the far end of the room, as far from David as the space allowed. He recognized Bortek, a Herlon security officer, among them. The amphibian's skin had shifted to a muddy brown color that David had learned meant discomfort. David ate alone. The chicken tasted like loneliness. He was nearly finished when Bortek approached, moving with the careful waddle of his species. The Herlon stopped a full table length away. "Human David," Bortek said. His voice was a deep croak. "I must inform you that several species have filed noise complaints." "Noise?" "Olfactory noise. Your meal produces chemical signatures that many species find distressing. 3 different groups have requested that humans restrict cooking activities to sealed quarters." David felt heat rise in his face, and not from the food. "I'm just eating dinner." "I understand. I am only informing you of the complaints. Station regulations allow your current activity." Bortek paused. "But between us, human to sentient, you might want to be more careful. Some species consider the smells from human food to be aggressive acts." "Aggressive?" "Predator scent markers. Chemical weapons. Rot indicators." "It depends on the species." Bortek's skin rippled. "To a Herlon, your meal smells like a thing that has died in the sun and been colonized by poison fungus." "It's chicken." "Yes," Bortek said. "That is the problem." The Herlon left, and David sat with his half-eaten dinner, feeling very far from home. Earth was 6 months away by the fastest ships. The human delegation on Meridian's rest numbered only 20 people, scattered across the massive station. Most of them worked different shifts, pursuing different negotiations with different species. David went days sometimes without seeing another human face. He'd started cooking to feel less alone. His quarters had a small kitchen unit, and he brought spices from Earth. Careful recipes his grandmother had taught him. The act of cooking connected him to home in ways that video calls couldn't manage. The smell of garlic and rosemary, the sound of meat sizzling in a pan, the taste of something made with his own hands instead of printed by a machine. Now even that small comfort was marked as wrong. Too human. Too dangerous for the delicate species that filled the galaxy. David packed his containers and stood to leave. The cafeteria felt enormous and empty around him. His footsteps echoed on the metal floor near the waste recyclers. Something moved. David caught the motion from the corner of his eye. A small figure, maybe a meter tall, was crouched behind one of the large recycling units. Reptilian features, green-gold scales, large eyes that caught the overhead lights. A saurian, David thought, though he wasn't certain. The species was common on the station, usually working maintenance and cleaning jobs. The saurian was watching him. More specifically, the creature's nostrils were flaring, head tilted back slightly, taking in the scent. Their eyes met for just a moment. The saurian didn't look disgusted, didn't look afraid. The expression on that alien face was something else entirely, something David couldn't quite name. Then the creature ducked behind the recycler and was gone, leaving David alone with his dangerous dinner and the ache of being too different for the galaxy to accept. He walked back to his quarters, through empty corridors, past aliens who gave him wide berth, and tried not to think about how much he missed home. Dr. Helena Cross pulled up the file on her datapad and sighed. "You're not going to like this," she said. David sat across from her in the human medical bay, a small room that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. Helena had called him in that morning, saying she wanted to discuss the cafeteria incident. Word traveled fast among the human delegation. "Show me," David said. Helena turned the datapad around. The screen displayed what looked like a chemical analysis chart, covered in symbols and numbers that meant nothing to David, but the header was clear. Enough. Interspecies Dietary Compatibility Assessment. Human Food Preparation Methods. "This is the official galactic database on human cuisine," Helena explained. She scrolled through pages of warnings, cautions, and restriction notices, updated whenever a new species joins the community and tests our food for compatibility. Want to guess how many species can safely eat a typical human meal? I'm guessing not many. 12. Out of 473 known spacefaring species, exactly 12 can consume human food without serious medical consequences. And even those 12 have to be careful about portions and preparation methods. David leaned back in his chair. "Why?" Helena smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Because Earth is what they call a death world. High gravity, extreme temperature variations, intense radiation from the sun, thousands of competing species all trying to kill and eat each other. Humans evolved to survive in conditions that would kill most galactic species in hours. I know Earth is harsher than most planets," David said. "But food? Food especially?" Helena pulled up another file. "Human digestive systems can process an enormous range of organic compounds. Things that are deadly poison to other species are vitamins to us. Our ancestors ate everything they could catch, kill, or dig up because that's what it took to survive. We develop tolerances for toxins, allergens, and compounds that most species never encounter." She scrolled through the file, pointing out entries. Garlic contains sulfur compounds that are poisonous to 3 major species groups. Capsaicin, the chemical that makes pepper spicy, is classified as a weapon by the Fenthic Accord. Onions produce chemicals that can trigger respiratory failure in Nessian physiology. And don't even get me started on alcohol. What about cooking? David asked. The server yesterday called it thermal preparation, like it was dangerous. It is to them. Helena pulled up an image showing molecular structures. When you cook meat at high temperature, you create the Maillard reaction. Hundreds of new chemical compounds form from the breakdown and recombination of proteins and sugars. It's what makes cooked food taste good to us. To most aliens, those compounds register as poison indicators or predator threat markers. David thought about Bortek's comment. Predator scent markers. So when I eat a normal meal, he said slowly, other species smell death and poison. Basically, yes. Helena shut off the datapad. The core species, the ones who run the galactic community, they're almost all from garden worlds. Stable climates, limited competition, abundant resources. They evolved eating simple plant matter or basic proteins. Their food is optimized for safety and efficiency. Nutrient paste, hydroponic vegetables, synthesized supplements. Sounds boring. It is. I've tried it. Helena made a face. Perfectly balanced nutrition, zero flavor. But that's the point. Flavor usually comes from complex chemical compounds. And complex chemistry means danger to species that never had to develop broad-spectrum digestive systems. David was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he asked, "Is there anything we can do about it?" "You mean besides eating in our quarters and never cooking anything stronger than plain rice?" Helena shrugged. "Not really. Ambassador Wright has suggested we be more careful about when and where we prepare traditional foods. Try to minimize offense to other species. So we make ourselves smaller," David said. "Hide another part of what makes us human." "I didn't say I agreed with it. I'm just telling you the political reality." Helena stood and walked to the small window that looked out over the station's interior. "We're outnumbered out here, David, 20 humans on a station with 50,000 aliens. We have to pick our battles." David left the medical bay feeling worse than when he'd arrived. He had lunch with Gresh, a Torvin merchant he'd been negotiating a trade agreement with for weeks. Gresh brought his own food in a sealed container, as he always did. David had never thought much about it before. They ate across from each other, each consuming their own incompatible meals. Unable to share even this basic act of connection that afternoon, David met with a Mechthery scholar named Eula for what was supposed to be a cultural exchange interview. Eula specialized in interspecies relations and was writing a paper on human integration into the galactic community. "Tell me," Eula said, her feathers rustling with academic interest, "how does it feel to be biologically incompatible with most of civilized space?" David considered his answer carefully. "Lonely," he finally said. Eula made notes on her device. "Fascinating. Most species view human eating habits as aggressively dangerous. Your omnivorous nature, your tolerance for toxins, your preference for thermal preparation and chemical complexity in food. These traits mark humans as primitive survivors rather than civilized beings. Is that what you think?" "I think," Eula said, "that civilization is often just another word for forgetting where you came from." That evening, David returned to his quarters and found a piece of paper slipped under his door. Real paper, not a datapad message. The writing was in standard script, but shaky and uncertain, like someone still learning the language. "Your food smells like home feels. Meet loading bay 7, third shift tomorrow?" There was no signature. David held the note for a long time, reading it again and again. Someone on this station, someone who wasn't human, had smelled his cooking and thought of home. He checked the schedule. Third shift started in 20 hours. David decided he would be there. Loading bay 7 was cold. David pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped off the lift into the cargo area. This section of Meridian's Rest was deep in the lower levels, where the station's perfect climate control gave way to the reality of space. Frost formed on the exposed metal walls. His breath came out in small clouds. The bay stretched out before him, filled with stacks of cargo containers waiting for transport. Overhead lights flickered at half power, creating pools of shadow between the crates. David walked carefully, watching for movement, half expecting this to be some kind of joke or trap. Human David. The voice came from behind a stack of containers marked with symbols David didn't recognize. He turned, tensed, ready to run if needed. 3 figures emerged from the shadows. The first was the Saurian from the cafeteria, barely a meter tall with green-gold scales and enormous eyes. The second was huge, easily 2.5 meters, covered in thick fur and built like a bear. The third was older, feline in appearance, with gray fur and a scarred face that spoke of a hard life. They kept their distance, forming a loose semicircle around David, but not approaching too close. Careful, respectful, the Saurian spoke first. "Thank you for coming. I am Pip. This is Kess," he indicated the large furred being, and Nella, the feline female, nodded. "You left the note," David said. "Yes, I work maintenance, third shift. I clean the cafeteria." Pip's tail swished nervously. "I have watched humans for 2 months now. Watched how you move, how you endure the gravity that tires others, how you eat food that sends other species running. Kess rumbled something in a language David's translator struggled with. The device rendered it as, "We are not from the soft worlds. We understand hardship." "I don't follow," David said. Nella stepped forward slightly. She moved with a limp, favoring her left side. "The core species," she said, her voice rough with age. "The Theron, the Praxians, the Methane Collective, all the ones who run the galactic community. They come from paradise worlds. Easy gravity, perfect temperatures, no predators, no scarcity. They think their way is the only civilized way. We are from the edges," Pip added. "Frontier worlds, harsher places. Not death worlds like Earth, but not gardens either. We work the jobs the core species will not touch. We fix things, clean things, move cargo, repair systems." Kess spoke again, and this time the translator handled it better. "They call us primitive because we remember what survival tastes like." David was beginning to understand. "You wanted to meet because of my food?" "Yes." Pip's eyes were bright with something David recognized as hope. "Is it really as terrible as the higher species claim? Is human food truly poison and death? Or," Nella said quietly, "are they afraid of something else?" David thought about his conversation with Dr. Cross, about the database of warnings and restrictions, about eating alone while others fled. Then he thought about his grandmother's kitchen, the smell of bread baking, the taste of food made with care instead of printed by a machine. "I could cook for you," he said. "Tomorrow night, my quarters, let you decide for yourselves." The three aliens exchanged glances. Pip's tail was moving faster now, excited. Kess made a sound that might have been laughter. Nella's scarred face softened into what could have been a smile. "You would do this?" Pip asked. "If you want to risk it." "Risk?" Nella tested the word. "My people eat raw fish that other species call poison. Kess's culture ferments their food for months before consuming it. Pip's species has a tolerance for alkaloids that would kill a Theron in minutes. We have taken risks all our lives." Kess added, "The soft species fear complexity. They eat paste and call it civilization. They have forgotten that life is more than safety." "Then it's settled," David said. "Tomorrow night, third shift. I'll make something special. Do you have any dietary restrictions I should know about?" Pip made a clicking sound that the translator rendered as amusement. "Fewer than most. That is why we are here." They talked for another hour in the cold loading bay, sharing stories. Nella described her homeworld, where the oceans were acidic and the fish had evolved defenses that made them dangerous to eat. Her people had learned to process the toxins, turning poison into flavor. The core species had called it barbaric when her people joined the galactic community. Kess talked about growing up on a world with long, harsh winters where food had to be preserved through fermentation and smoking. The smell of his people's traditional foods had caused a diplomatic incident during first contact. Now Kess worked as a dock worker, eating bland paste and trying to forget the taste of home. Pip spoke about being young and poor, taking a job on Meridian's Rest because it paid better than anything on his homeworld. He'd left behind the spicy, complex foods of his culture for the safety of approved galactic cuisine. But he still dreamed about the meals his mother made. David listened and understood. They were all exiles in their own way, separated from their cultures by a galaxy that valued safety over flavor, uniformity over diversity. When they finally parted, Nella said something that David would remember for a long time. "The soft species that run the galaxy have forgotten that survival has a taste. Maybe you humans remember." David rode the lift back to his quarters, thinking about garlic and rosemary, about chicken skin crisping in heat, about bread rising in an oven, about all the small acts of defiance that separated the living from the merely surviving. He had a menu to plan. Garlic sizzled in olive oil, filling the small kitchen with golden light and better smells. David worked with practiced efficiency, moving between pots and pans like a conductor leading an orchestra. The pork roast sat in the oven, skin crackling to perfect crispness. Potatoes boiled on one burner while vegetables roasted on a tray. Bread dough, prepared hours earlier, had risen beautifully and now baked alongside the meat. His quarters smelled like earth, like home. like his grandmother's house on Sunday. Afternoons. The door chimed. David wiped his hands on a towel and checked the security screen. Pip stood in the corridor, looking nervous. David opened the door. "Come in. You're the first to arrive." Pip stepped inside and froze. His nostrils flared wide, taking in the scents that filled the small space. His eyes went huge, pupils dilating in what David hoped was pleasure rather than shock. "Is this normal?" Pip asked, his voice quiet with wonder. "For human homes to smell like this? When someone's cooking, yes, it is beautiful." The door chimed again. Kes and Nella arrived together, and David welcomed them in. Both had the same reaction as Pip, stopping just inside the door to breathe deeply. Kes made a low rumbling sound that David's translator didn't even try to interpret. David had set his small table with actual plates and utensils. 4 chairs borrowed from storage. A pitcher of water, since he wasn't sure what else they could safely drink. Everything arranged with care. "Sit," he said. "This will be ready in a few minutes." He served the meal in stages, the way his grandmother had taught him. Bread first, still warm from the oven, with butter melting into the soft interior. All 3 of his guests approached it cautiously, but Pip was the brave one. He tore off a small piece and lifted it to his mouth. David watched Pip's expression change. The Saurian's eyes closed. He chewed slowly, deliberately, like he was trying to understand what was happening in his mouth. Then he swallowed and opened his eyes. "What is this?" Pip asked. "Just bread. Flour, water, yeast, salt. Butter is from animal milk. It tastes like 6 different things at once." "How is that possible?" David smiled. "The crust is from the Maillard reaction, the browning from heat. The inside is soft because of how the yeast creates air pockets. The butter adds fat, which carries flavor. It's simple food, really?" Nella tried a piece next, then Kes. Neither spoke for a long moment. "My people's bread is flat and hard," Nella finally said. "Fuel for the body. This is something else." David brought out the main course. Roasted pork with herb crust, the skin crackling and golden. Mashed potatoes with butter and garlic. Vegetables that gleamed with olive oil and caramelization. The smells intensified as he set the dishes on the table. Kes took the first bite of meat. The large alien went completely still, fork halfway back to the plate. David felt a moment of panic, wondering if he'd miscalculated, if the food was actually poisoning his guest. Then Kes set the fork down carefully and spoke. "This is what the core species fear," Kes said. "This complexity. This depth. I understand now. Is it too much?" David asked. "No, it is perfect. It is exactly what they told us was wrong and dangerous and primitive." Kes took another bite, savoring it. They lied. Nella was methodical, trying each dish separately, analyzing the flavors with the care of a scientist. "The meat has been exposed to sustained heat, yes? Roasted for 3 hours at medium temperature. And these herbs, they are the toxic compounds mentioned in the dietary warnings. Rosemary and thyme? Yes. Also garlic, which has sulfur. They transform in the heat," Nella said. "Become something new. Something layered and complex." She looked at David with her scarred, ancient eyes. "Your people understand that danger can become beauty with proper knowledge." Pip had stopped talking entirely. He was eating with single-minded focus, trying everything, going back for seconds. When he finally paused, there were tears in his large eyes. "I did not know food could be like this," he said simply. David sat down with them and explained as they ate. He talked about the human philosophy of cooking, about building layers of flavor through technique and time. Salt to enhance, fat to carry, acid to balance, heat to transform. The way you could take simple ingredients and make them into something greater than the sum of their parts. "It's not about having fancy ingredients," he said. "It's about understanding how flavors work together, how heat changes things, how time and care can turn basic food into something worth sharing." Nella nodded slowly. "The core species eat nutrition paste designed by computers. They optimize for efficiency and safety. They have removed all the complexity, all the risk. And all the joy, Kes added. They look down on us for eating what they call primitive food, Pip said. Food with strong tastes and smells. They say it marks us as uncivilized. David felt anger kindle in his chest. There's nothing uncivilized about flavor, about taking time to prepare food with care, about sharing a meal with others. No, Nella agreed. But there is threat. We are kept in our place partly through shame. Told our foods are wrong, our tastes are primitive, our cultures are backwards. If we accept their bland paste, we accept their hierarchy. The table went quiet. David looked at his three guests, at the empty plates between them, at the way they sat together despite coming from different worlds and different species. Could you teach us? Kes asked. To cook like this? For ourselves, Pip added. And for others like us. Nella's eyes were sharp. There are more of us than you know. Workers, traders, beings from the frontier. Those who remember that life should taste like something. David thought about consequences. About diplomatic incidents and political pressure. About Ambassador Wright's warnings to be careful. Then he thought about Pip's tears. About the joy of sharing food. About fighting loneliness with bread and salt and thyme. Yes, he said. I'll teach you. The converted storage room smelled like 15 different HOMEWORLDS. David stood at the front, looking out at faces from a dozen species. Pip was there, and Casanella, but they brought others, a Quellen with crystalline features, 2 Varun siblings who worked waste recycling, a young Tessek who couldn't be more than 20, a cluster of Meridian maintenance workers, even a Fenthic, which surprised David since that species supposedly couldn't tolerate human spices. 3 weeks had passed since that first dinner. Word had spread quietly through the station's working levels, passed between dock workers and janitors, mechanics and small traders. The human who cooked real food. The human who would teach. Tomas Reed stood beside David, another human who'd been on the station longer. Tomas had worked as a chef on a colony ship before taking a technical position on Meridian's Rest. When David had mentioned the cooking classes, Tomas had volunteered immediately. Right, David said, raising his voice to address the group. Today we're covering the basics: heat, salt, fat, acid. The 4 elements that make food taste good. He demonstrated with simple ingredients available from the station markets. An onion, which he sliced and showed how to caramelize slowly in fat. The transformation from sharp and bitter to sweet and complex. How heat broke down the rigid cell walls and released sugars that then browned and deepened. The students watched with intense focus. Several took notes on datapads. The Maillard reaction, Thomas explained, taking over while David stirred the onions. It's what happens when proteins and sugars are exposed to heat above a certain temperature. Hundreds of new compounds form. That's what creates the taste and smell of cooked food. The core species fear this, said Nella from the front row. She'd become something of an assistant, helping translate concepts for students whose biology work differently from humans. They call it dangerous chemistry. It is chemistry, David agreed, but not dangerous if you understand it. Knowledge turns risk into reward. Over the following weeks, they covered more complex techniques. Knife skills, which translated surprisingly well across species with very different appendages. Heat control, from gentle simmering to high-temperature searing. Building layers of flavor by adding ingredients at different stages. The importance of tasting and adjusting as you worked. The classes became more than just cooking instruction. Students brought ingredients from their own cultures, things they'd hidden away or only eaten in private shame. A Varun brought fermented paste that smelled terrible but tasted rich and complex. A Tessek smuggled in spice pods that the core species had banned as too primitive. A Quellen contributed mineral salts from their homeworld that added depth to everything. They created fusion dishes, combining human techniques with alien ingredients. Pip learned to make bread and started experimenting with grain substitutes from his homeworld. Kes discovered a talent for slow roasting and began teaching others his people's preservation methods. Nella, with her analytical mind, started documenting. recipes and techniques, creating a database of cross-species cooking knowledge. A Varun named Orvin became their connection to the black market. He could source ingredients that weren't available in legal markets, things banned or restricted because the core species deemed them too dangerous or primitive. Spices that had actual flavor, herbs that did more than add color, proteins that weren't grown in sterile vats. The council tries to control us through food, Orvin explained one evening, setting out packages of contraband seasonings. Keep us eating paste, keep us thinking we're not civilized enough for real flavor. It maintains the hierarchy. A young Tessek named Shira had joined the group despite coming from a wealthy family. Her father sat on the station council. She'd rejected her family's pretensions and spent her time with the working class, learning to cook alongside beings her parents considered beneath them. My father says flavor is for primitives, Shira told David while learning to season properly. That civilized beings eat for nutrition, not pleasure. He thinks I'm shaming the family by being here. What do you think? David asked. I think he's never tasted anything real in his life. I think he's afraid of what he might feel if he did. The classes grew larger, 30 students, then 40. They had to move to a bigger storage space, then rent a room in the lower commercial district. The students paid what they could, pooling resources to buy ingredients and equipment. David and Tomas taught for free, driven by something deeper than money. But success brought attention. Station security started noticing the gatherings. Questions were asked about the unusual smells coming from the rented space. Beings from the higher levels complained about seeing lower-class workers carrying cooking supplies through the corridors. Ambassador Wright called David to her office. You're causing problems, she said without preamble. The Theran delegation has filed a complaint. So have the Praxians and 3 other core species. They're saying you're spreading dangerous practices and corrupting station workers. I'm teaching people to cook. You're challenging the social order. Food is one of the ways the core species maintain separation from the working classes. By teaching workers to prepare complex food, you're giving them tools of cultural resistance. David met her eyes. Is that a problem? Wright was quiet for a long moment, then she sighed. Officially, yes. Unofficially, I think what you're doing matters. But you need to be prepared for consequences. A formal hearing has been scheduled for next week. The council is considering restrictions on human food preparation and a ban on your cooking classes. Can they do that? They can do whatever they want. They run the station. David left the meeting feeling the weight of what he'd started. That evening, he told the class about the hearing. He expected fear, maybe anger. Instead, he found determination. Let them try to stop us, Kess rumbled. We will not go back to paste and shame, Pip nodded. You showed us that our cultures have worth, that our foods are not primitive but valuable. We will not forget that, Nella stood, her old bones creaking. We fight, she said simply, not with weapons, with food. With flavor, with the truth that complexity is not danger, but life. The class agreed. And David knew that whatever happened, at the hearing, something had changed that could not be unchanged. They had tasted something real, and there was no going back to emptiness. The council chamber was designed to intimidate. David sat in a chair that was too small, looking up at the semicircle of elevated platforms where the station's ruling council presided. Representatives from the major species, all from core worlds, all comfortable and soft and powerful. Behind him sat Ambassador Wright and Captain Sarah Lynn, the human security liaison. Tomas had wanted to come, but they'd agreed it was better to have him outside, preparing. Counselor Venth spoke first. The Theran's environmental suit hissed and clicked as he moved. Human David Torres, you stand accused of violating station safety protocols by teaching dangerous food preparation methods to station workers. How do you respond? David had prepared a diplomatic answer, something careful and political. But looking at Venth's cold mechanical eyes, at the way the other council members looked down at him, he felt his grandmother's voice in his head. Never apologize for feeding people, she'd always said. I taught people to cook, David said. That's not a crime. You exposed multiple species to hazardous chemical compounds. A Praxian counselor interjected, her energy form flickering with irritation. We have documented cases of individuals becoming ill after consuming food prepared using your methods. 3 cases of mild digestive upset, David corrected. Out of over 100 students across 6 weeks. That's a better safety record than the station cafeteria. Venth's suit vents opened wider. The issue is not merely physical safety. You have encouraged workers to reject approved nutrition in favor of primitive, dangerous food practices. You have undermined the dietary standards that maintain order and health throughout the station. I taught people to enjoy their food, David said. To connect with their own cultures. To share meals with each other. Since when is that a crime? Since it disrupts the social order, Venth said flatly. Station Administrator Kell, I move for immediate sanctions. A ban on human cooking in public spaces and a prohibition on instruction in human food preparation methods. Administrator Kell. The Praxian who ran Meridian's Rest considered this from his position at the center of the council. His energy form swirled thoughtfully in its containment suit. Before he could speak, Ambassador Wright stood. I request permission to present a demonstration. The council exchanged glances. Venth's suit vents narrowed. What kind of demonstration? Allow us 2 hours to prepare. We'll show you exactly what we've been teaching. Then you can make an informed decision. It was a gamble. David had no idea what Wright was planning. But Kell nodded slowly. 2 hours. Then we reconvene in the main plaza. This hearing is recessed. David followed Wright out of the chamber. What are you doing? Giving you a chance, Wright said. Tomas is already setting up in the plaza. We got permission from the commercial district managers yesterday, just in case. Call your students. Tell them to bring everything they've learned. The next 2 hours passed in a blur, the main plaza of Meridian's. Rest was a vast open space where multiple corridors intersected, surrounded by shops and restaurants that served the station's higher-class residents. Tomas had set up portable cooking stations in the center, running power from emergency supply points. David sent word through Pip, who spread it through the maintenance network, who passed it to the dock workers, who told the traders they came. All of them, 50 students, carrying supplies and equipment, converging on the plaza. They set up alongside the cooking stations, each one preparing dishes they'd learned or created. Pip made his bread, now perfected with ingredients from his homeworld. Kess roasted vegetables using human techniques combined with his people's traditional seasonings. Nella prepared a fish dish that combined human, thermal preparation with her culture's traditional flavor profiles. The smells began spreading through the plaza. Complex, layered, rich. Nothing like the bland efficiency of approved station food, the council returned to find a feast being prepared in public view. Higher-class residents of the station had gathered, drawn by the unusual activity and the smells. Some complained. Some watched with curiosity. Some, David noticed, looked hungry. David and Tomas worked at the central station, demonstrating techniques while explaining them over the public system. How heat transformed ingredients. How salt enhanced natural flavors. How fat carried taste to receptors. How acid provided balance. The chemistry of cooking explained in simple terms that anyone could understand. This is not about danger, David said, his voice carrying across the plaza. It's about knowledge. About taking basic ingredients and using time and care to make them into something worth sharing. Every culture here represented, every species, you all have your own food traditions, your own techniques, your own flavors. The core species told you those traditions were primitive, wrong, shameful. He gestured at his students, at the dozens of beings from working-class species preparing dishes that combined human methods with their own cultures. But there's nothing shameful about flavor, about complexity, about caring enough to make food that feeds more than just your body. The students began serving, offering small portions to anyone willing to try. Some of the higher-class residents refused, backing away, but others approached cautiously. A Theron merchant, curiosity overcoming fear, tried Pip's bread. His environmental suit's sensors flickered as he processed the taste. "This is extraordinary," the merchant said loud enough for others to hear. More beings approached. The working-class students served food to their supposed betters, sharing what they'd learned. The plaza filled with the sounds of eating, of conversation, of barriers being crossed with small bites of carefully prepared food. Counselor Venth watched from the edge of the plaza, his suit rigid with disapproval. But Administrator Kell moved forward. Accepting a plate from Nella, the ancient Praxian sampled each dish, taking his time. Finally, Kell spoke. "The council will vote on the proposed restrictions." David held his breath. "Motion fails," Kell announced. "The human cooking instruction may continue, provided proper safety certifications are obtained. Human food preparation will be reclassified from hazardous to supervised use. All species retain the right to choose their own dietary practices without prejudice." It wasn't everything. But it was enough, Venth protested, but other council members were already sampling the food. The vote stood, weeks later. David sat in the lower commercial district at one of 3 new restaurants run by his former students. Pip's bakery 2 doors down filled the corridor with the smell of fresh bread. Kess had partnered with a Varun to open a fusion kitchen. Nella consulted for all of them, her database of cross-species recipes growing daily. The galaxy was still vast. Humans were still strange. But in one small corner of Meridian's Rest, food had become a bridge where diplomacy had failed. Different species sat together, sharing meals that combined their traditions. Learning that complexity was not danger but richness, David took a bite of bread. Tasting home and belonging and the simple truth that one taste really could change everything.